Today, we're diving into the profound and honestly pretty wild life of one of literature's greatest figures, Leo Tolstoy. Now, imagine for a second that you live two completely different lives. In one, you're a global celebrity, a novelist praised by everyone. And in the other, you're a radical prophet who rejects everything that made you famous in the first place. Well, that wasn't a thought experiment for Tolstoy. That was his reality. And that's really the central mystery we're unpacking here. How does someone at the absolute pinnacle of their craft, a true literary genius, turn around and despise the very work that made them a legend? It's a heck of a story, so let's get into it. And I'm not exaggerating when I say he hated his work. He called Anna Karenina, a book many people would say is one of the most perfect novels ever written, an abomination. An abomination! To even begin to understand how he got there, we have to start with his first life. Right, so this is the Tolstoy we all think we know. The literary titan, the master of realism, the guy who basically wrote the book on the 19th century novel. So Tolstoy was born into the Russian aristocracy, but he was always a bit of a rebel. I mean, he dropped out of university, and when he joined the military, his experience in the Crimean War didn't make him a flag-waving patriot. Nope, it turned him into a hardcore pacifist for life. And his first taste of fame actually came from writing about that brutal experience in his Sevastopol sketches. But that early success, that was just the warm-up act, because what he would write next would change the game completely. We're talking about two absolute monuments of literature. First, there's War and Peace, which is just immense. It's this wild mix of a novel, a history book, and a philosophical deep dive all rolled into one. And then he follows that up with Anna Karenina, which he himself called his first real novel. It's this perfectly crafted story about society, love, and what it all means. And this quote right here tells you everything about his ambition. Tolstoy wasn't trying to fit into any neat little boxes. He literally said War and Peace wasn't a novel. He was trying to create something totally new, something that could actually capture the messy, sprawling, beautiful chaos of real life. Good then, right at this moment, at the absolute height of his powers, when he was the most famous author on the planet, everything just shattered. This wasn't a slow fizzle. It was a full-blown spiritual explosion. And here's the craziest part. His crisis wasn't sparked by failure. It was sparked by his incredible success. He had it all, the fame, the money, the family, the genius, and he woke up one day and decided it was all completely, totally meaningless. He started to feel disgusted by his own wealth and the very art that gave it to him. It all came down to this one single question that just consumed him. He wrote it down in his book, Confession. And it's a question that's just terrifyingly relatable, isn't it? What's the point of any of this if we're all just going to die anyway? His hunt for an answer would change everything. You can kind of see his transformation happen in three stages. First, the crisis hits, and he's just drowning in shame about his life. That leads him on this desperate search for truth, which he thinks he finds by reading the teachings of Jesus super literally. And the final step? He completely rejects his own incredible novels, calling them nothing more than vain, immoral entertainment for the rich. Now, as you can imagine, this didn't just stay in his head. It caused a massive storm in his own home. Tolstoy wanted to give away all his money, all his property, all the rights to his books. But his poor wife, Sophia, was left trying to figure out how to feed their huge family. To her, Anna Karenina wasn't some vanity project. It was their livelihood. It was a brutal, heartbreaking conflict between his ideals and her reality. And just like that, the second act of his life begins. The great novelist was gone, and in his place stood someone new, Tolstoy the moral prophet. He didn't just have new beliefs. He created a whole philosophy, which people started calling Tolstoyanism. At its heart, it was a kind of Christian anarchism. It called for absolute nonviolence, a super simple lifestyle, and getting rid of all governments and churches, which he saw as fundamentally violent and corrupt. So what did this look like? Well, the main idea was that you couldn't change the world through politics or revolution. For Tolstoy, the only real change had to come from inside each and every person. It was all about perfecting your own conscience, living simply, and absolutely refusing to participate in any kind of violence, ever. Your own conscience was the only authority that mattered. Of course, if you're going to reinvent your entire moral universe, you're going to have to reinvent your ideas about art, too. The man who wrote War and Peace couldn't just believe in art for art's sake anymore. So he just threw out all the old definitions. Forget beauty, forget pleasure. For the new Tolstoy, art had one job, and one job only: to be a vehicle for moral feeling. He said good art had to infect the audience with a feeling of empathy, of universal brotherhood. And if it didn't do that, it wasn't just bad art, it was fake art. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so the world's greatest novelist became this obscure religious eccentric. End of story. But this is where things get truly wild. Because, believe it or not, this second prophetic life may have had an even bigger impact on the world than his first. I mean, this table just lays it out perfectly. You've got the two Tolstoys. On one side, the great novelist, writing about high society and exploring all the messy gray areas of life. And on the other, the moral prophet, an anarchist who writes manifestos and believes art must have a crystal clear moral purpose. It's like two different people inhabiting the same body. And here is the ultimate irony. While Tolstoy himself had rejected his great novels, it was his later religious and political writing, specifically his ideas on non-violent resistance, that would go on to literally change the world. His influence was just massive. A young lawyer in South Africa named Mahatma Gandhi read Tolstoy's work and said it was a fundamental inspiration for his entire strategy of nonviolent revolution in India. And decades after that, Martin Luther King Jr. pointed to Tolstoy as a major influence on the American civil rights movement. Just think about that. The ideas of a tormented Russian count helped inspire two of the greatest liberation movements in modern history. But Tolstoy himself never found peace. Finally, at 82 years old, completely tormented by the hypocrisy of his life, preaching poverty while living on a huge estate, he just ran away. He secretly fled his home in the middle of the night, but he got sick on the journey and died a few days later at a tiny remote train station. His final words, as his family and doctors crowded around him, were, "Why are you all around me?" Even at the very end, his mind was on the suffering of others. In the end, his death was a perfect metaphor for his entire life. A man caught in the impossible space between the world he was born into and the one he desperately wanted to create. And that leaves us with the giant question that Tolstoy's life just forces you to ask. What's more important? Is it better to create a timeless, perfect work of art that will be cherished for centuries? Or is it better to try and live a life of perfect moral conviction, even if it means you have to reject that very same masterpiece? There's no easy answer to that one.